The protagonist of this story was born the first princess of the kingdom of Beri, for the sake of her little brother, who would become a future king, and her little sister and parents. For the sake of meeting the expectations of her precious family, and more importantly, for the sake of the nation, she had to do her best. Parents who were worried about her. It was because they cared about her. Her father told her to leave secular society for her younger siblings. Her parents didn't want her to go out in public. She could only be happy that her parents cherished her. All in all, she had duties as well, quite a few of them. Being part of the royal family, she was naturally involved in politics and diplomacy, and her free time, which she had very little of, she could devote to learning magic. It made her feel that her life was happy and full. There was not even a second for some ordinary rest. This all lasted until war broke out with the Shariol Empire. Especially everyone felt the trouble when her little sister was stolen, and her father came to ask our protagonist, named Lars, to help them. Her father has asked her a lot to save her sister Nicole, taken hostage for the sake of the people. She has to help them. Father only asked for her power. The only thing she can count on is her immense magical power. All Lars had to do was sigh and say that she understood her father. As a member of the royal family, she would stand on the battlefield. The whole family was very excited, especially the mother and father. As expected, and when the fight itself began, Lars entered the battlefield. It was no surprise at all to the warriors. Everyone said so, as it was expected of a member of the royal family to be Lars. Lars certainly had tremendous magical power. She didn't even overwork herself from throwing her punches, but she was upset when she saw how much she hurt people. It was a surprise to her. On the battlefield lay a great many men who could not open their eyes. They were dead. There was a lot of fire, and someone even shouted, "Save him! He doesn't want to die hot because he burned the fire!" At one point Lars hesitated and probably wanted to go to the rescue to save her own enemies. But the knights at her side royal, they shouted, "Now it's time to end this, princess! Strike your last blow!" It was very difficult for the girl. She didn't want to kill anyone. But for her family, everyone screamed. For her family. She had to strike her final blow to burn everything to the ground. Everything and all her enemies. However, the Shariol Empire, which was famous for its immense military might, was almost impossible to defeat. On the battlefield they shouted that Beria's kingdom had admitted defeat. But Beria's wars were spoken in terms of, when did they admit defeat? Why are they still fighting? Well, as it turns out, they have a lot of warriors in the Shariol Empire. The people standing on the battlefield shouted, "Wait! The enemy is so close, advancing again, and the princess didn't succeed." The consequences of the defeat were such that they were all captured, and the girl Princess Lars, nicknamed Bat, as well. The aftermath was a living hell. Shariol Empire, the dungeon of the palace where Princess Lars was being held. An unknown voice says, "How many more times must he be told? Even if you are a princess, that doesn't mean you can return to Beria." It was a condition for the return of Princess Nicole, who was Emperor Ziffin's slave. "You have been sold," the voice repeated once more. That voice was the men from Shariol, who stood and taunted the princess. The girl didn't understand the condition of Nicole's return. She asked the exchange for her. She thought being taken prisoner meant marriage. If it were Nicole, she'd be empress. Her parents begged Lars to help. "Shouldn't she, as the older sister, save her poor Nicole?" they said. People stood and laughed and said, "This is proof that your country has abandoned you." But Princess Lars rejected it all and said it was a lie. "It can't be. They can't do that to her." Some time passed. Days when her pride as a member of the royal family was trampled. Princess Lars continued to sit in the dungeon. One day a young man visited her. He came and said, "Is it really true, Princess Beria, who has repeatedly crushed their army into ashes?" Lars answered right. She could make him her toy. She looked at the guy with a very grinning face, and added that he too would fall, as would all his army. But the guy reached out to her and said, "Then it will come true. She must go with him." But the princess screamed her refusal. She is a princess of Berea who will not sell out her kingdom even though it has betrayed her. The resentment that follows, Princess Lars refused how foolish she was to refuse his offer, and now she will spend time in the dungeon for a very long time. After a while the executioners came in, saying it looked like this girl had taken someone out of the government. It was an order from on high. She was a dirty mouse of Beria. A man stood with a sword and mocked the girl. They say she is not worthy even of His Majesty's gaze. She spent a long time being tortured and abused as much as she could. The young man who had suggested that she go with him came to her again, coming closer to the dungeon. He said she didn't look so bad. He continued talking to her, saying that it would be better if she became his mistress and didn't fight back. Princess Lars said he needed the information anyway. In addition to that, the reason he wanted to use it. The guy asked this sentence, taking off her bloody eye patch. He asked it sincerely. The girl dropped to her knees and said you needed to see for yourself. The next moment, the dungeon was opened and the girl was taken out. This guy said that he absolutely had to use her, the owner of enormous magic power, to finish off those who believed in a ridiculous idea. Coming to the girl, the guy continued talking to her. He thought she would understand him. She, who is no different from him, just has to understand him. A country she returned to after years. In her home country, she was greeted very well by everyone, and everyone blamed her for causing it by pouring a bucket of dirty water on her head. Also, many cried out because of her. Beria is mired in war. She is the cause of defeat, the cause of everything, the knights shouted. It was her, the Bat Princess. From the rumors, asked the officials. So it means that they haven't executed yet, according to the way everyone was counting on it. As the girl walked through the square, she was pelted with eggs, food, and anything else she could get her hands on, and shouted at by all the people, traitor, culprit. She was made out to be the greatest evil. Even her relatives, her closest kin, father, mother, sister, and brother, turned their backs on her and looked at her with contempt. The girl was thrown into a dungeon, only now in her own country. She didn't understand what was going on at all, what it all meant. She hadn't started the war. When her sister and brother came down to see her, Lars asked Nicole if she was doing all this to save her. But her brother said, "Lars, she still doesn't understand what happened." Now he's going to tell her. Not he, never thought one was trash in the first place, and her hair was proof of that. Before his mother married his father, who was about to take the throne, he had a wife with nothing but magic, and she might be his uncle's daughter. He hated them both. The presence of this monstrous magical power could only be explained by being related to his uncle, couldn't it? Princess Lars grabbed her head. Uncle. She's sure it's a past life. Her brother went on to say that his father took her in to get royalty. Well, she still wouldn't understand. Long before she went off to war, everything, all royal decisions were her responsibility. In this war, Princess Lars led her soldiers to show off her magical powers and decided to march against the Chariot. Her brother told her to think for herself. Had she ever imagined herself as royalty? This is the last message from my father. A necessary evil is such because it is necessary. I think she understood, her brother said, and walked away, leaving her in the dungeon. Princess Lars cried for a very long time, sitting on the floor of the cold, horribly filthy dungeon. She could not understand how she could have been betrayed by her own relatives. As suddenly a lantern flashed, and there was light in this dungeon, and there was a young man walking with a lantern and a plate of food with bread and nuts on it. Leaning over to give a plate of food to the princess, he held it out to her through the grate. The princess shouted, "Please!" She saw the man and said, "You knew everything, didn't you, working in the palace?" She doesn't know what she did, but tell me what happened over the years. She doesn't want to believe it all, but she still needs to know the truth. She doesn't want to die without knowing anything. And the guy working in this palace started telling her bit by bit the information that had been going on all this time. The 3rd of May on the continental calendar, the 6th of June on the continental calendar. He took a very long time to tell her. All because of her, Princess Lars said. For all these years, first her stay in the castle. She was just doing her best for her family, helping everyone, fulfilling all their requests. Lars remembered the words of the guy from Chariot who had told her that she needed to make sure in person. She was forced, or rather asked to do it for the people, to use her magic. But it's all out. The same people call her a rat and want her dead. She sacrificed her life, and everyone threw food on her head and mud on her head. The guy from Chariot had to do just that. Possessor of immense magical power, he said. He just has to use it to put an end to those who believed in a ridiculous idea. Lars' last words were that she would not forgive and asked for her life back. And in that same moment she was gone. When the moment she was gone, she closed her eyes. Just a second later she opened them and saw herself in front of the mirror. What happened? She asked. Lars looked around and saw that her room was all around. This place, she said. This is her room. All the furniture is standing in the same place it was. Saw the man she had seen in the dungeon. Definitely saw him. He was in the room and helped her slide a chair to the table. But the girl noticed that he was younger now, even much younger than when she went off to war. Lars had a strange look. One might say a questioning look. The maid who was in the room pouring tea said that you must be tired from celebrating Mrs. Nicole's birthday. Setting down a cup of tea, the maid said, "Time goes by so fast, doesn't it, ma'am?" Lars took a cup of tea and drank, and couldn't understand what kind of time it was that everyone was younger. The maid went on to say that she couldn't believe that Mrs. Nicole was already 16 years old. 16 years, Lars repeated it to herself once more. 16 years old. That means if Nicole is still only 16 years old, that means, Lars thought. But she decided to ask the maid. "Tell me, what is today's date in the continental calendar?" "What?" the maid asked, replying that today was the 4th day of March, the 654th year of the continental calendar. "What?" thought Lars. "That's more than years ago. What do we do?" The maids asked what was in the letter that was delivered from the Sheriol Empire this morning. Everyone thinks it's a marriage proposal to Mistress Nicole, but, oh, thought Lars, the Sheriol Empire, the wedding. This letter was only delivered today. "Speak," she said to the maids. She's sure, the girl thought, that the letter didn't refer specifically to the second Princess Nicole, but simply to Princess Beria, who was to be accepted as Empress. And that's the pretext for this whole war. Lars went to the mirror and looked at herself once more. She had definitely gotten younger, and not only on her neck, but in other parts of herself as well. She came back. Why, thought the girl, how can't understand what happened. However, the maids noticed that something was wrong with the mistress and asked, "Mistress, is something wrong?" Nolar began to remember everything. Everything that had happened, she knows for a fact that it was all happening for real. Who was? No dream. The girl was a little upset, her tears flowing, because when she remembered it all, it was like it was now. Looking in the mirror once more, she saw herself in a bandage, bloodied as she had been when she sat in Shariol's dungeon. She's pissed. Nah. Though of course as she screamed she dropped the glass which fell and shattered. She remembered absolutely everything. How her parents hated her. How absolutely everyone in her kingdom hated her and blamed her for everything. After the glass fell, the guards rushed into the room. They thought something had happened in the room, but the girl stood there with a veil in front of her eyes, remembering everything that had happened in her past life. Her parents said she was a good daughter, and she believed them like an idiot. And she ended up dead. Her parents killed her. She'll never forgive. Not her so-called parents who were only taking advantage of her. Not the idiot Eric who got all the honors. Not the henchwoman Nicole who was enjoying the spectacle behind their backs. She won't forgive any of these creatures who played with her life as they wished. The girl fell to the floor, clutching her head and not realizing what she should do now. Lars pulled herself together and decided to act differently. To the run-in guards, she said, "Sorry, it's been a tough one of them lately." And to the maids she said, "You need not inform your parents of this. She doesn't want to trouble them. They shouldn't have much to worry about as it is." And for the letters from Sheriol. All replied, "Yes, all right," and dispersed. Lars couldn't allow herself to be taken advantage of again. She endured all the time for the sake of her family and country, and they called her a villain after all she'd done for them. A servant girl knocked on the room with the words, "Excuse me, His Majesty told me to gather urgently." When she entered the room, she asked what had happened here. There was glass lying on the floor, something broken. Lars asked, "His Majesty, father?" The maid replied, Yes, the Chariot Empire." Lars remembers the day that this happened. All the words the maid had to say, she spoke quietly so no one would hear. Wants to make an announcement regarding the letter from the Chariot Empire, so she asks all family members to gather. The maid said that she wants to make an announcement regarding the letter from the Shrialpa Empire and asks all family members to gather. Lars smiled. All the same words, letter for letter. That is, she was now living through the same things that had already happened. She thought of her family. What nonsense! She remembered the words of her brother Eric, as he had said then that she had been their non-pawn from the beginning. Of course, there was no way she could know that. She stood in a room surrounded by a bunch of maids, a butler, all doing something. She looked at them and realized that everyone here knew the truth. "Okay," thought the girl, she said. Would like to ask you all to clean the room." All the servants replied, "Of course, Your Highness," and the girl left the room. If she has indeed traveled back in time, her father will soon announce what the letter from the Shariol Empire says. Princess Lars walked down the hallway to her father's office with a smile and the certainty that she already knew it all. Letters where they express a desire to take Princess Beria as empress. There are two princesses in this country, she and Nicole. Her younger sister Nicole eventually became empress. I don't know that it was a trap to take a member of the royal family hostage and force them to capitulate. The guy from the Shariol Empire told her she was going Princess Bat too. And her brother mocked her and said she'd been a pawn from the start. A pathetic girl. Everyone talked about her. Then Lars decided that if they wanted her to be the villain, so be it. She's gonna be the villain you all want her to be. She's made up her mind. Dinner table where the whole family is sitting. Mother, father, brother, and two sisters. Father says sorry for the urgency of bringing you all together. You've probably heard what we're talking about. A message was delivered today from the Shariol Empire. Princess Lars sat drinking tea and thinking that her father and mother were still good. She had really gone back in time. Father says that Emperor Zephin informs him that he wants to take Princess Beria as his wife. Eric jumped up from his chair and shouted, "Is it true?" in an indignant voice. Also, Nicole's sister was surprised. "So it's true?" she also exclaimed. Only Lars didn't yell anything, but sat back and thought. Yes. After thinking hard, the choice fell on Nicole, who just recently became an adult. In fact, the rules were supposed to pick Lars first princess, but at that point she had no qualms about it. Lars, not thinking long, said, "I agree, Nicole is a great candidate, but that was last time. She just wanted to be supportive like an older sister. But it's clear to her now, they were never going to choose her, Lars. Unlike Nicole, whom everyone loved, she was just an empty space, nothing more, nothing less. She should have realized this already when she was thrown onto the battlefield to save Nicole, who had become a hostage. For the sake of her family, she had to protect Nicole. She went about killing people and putting herself in danger, but in the end she was abandoned. So back to the conversation at the table. Eric jumped up and said, "Nicole will be an outstanding empress, becoming the bridge between Beria and Shariolt. Of course it won't be easy, but if that's Nicole..." So Lars thinks Eric's opinion is the same as before. I mean, just like last time, he hasn't changed his mind. Looking at Nicole, Lars thought that she hadn't changed her mind either. Her expression was as gloomy as it had been in her previous life. Then Lars thought, how can you miss a chance like this? Something has to be done. Something has to change. And Lars said, "I'm sorry, of course, but she's against it." Everyone looked at the girl. Nicole just looked surprised, but her brother looked the wrong way, scornful. Mother asked Lars what she meant. Shouldn't she, as the older sister, support Nicole? Lars stood up and said, "Yes, Nicole will undoubtedly make a great empress." However, if her fiancé, that tyrant, looked at Nicole, her eyes were very surprised. She didn't think there would be a tyrant there. So the tyrant Zephon Barb Verbena. Emperor Chariolt is a man notorious for his cruelty and cold-bloodedness. Surely Nicole, who was raised in love, will be afraid of him, said Lars' father. You must have heard many times. What rumors are going around the continent about Emperor Zephon? The misfortune of people who were executed on his word alone. Even if it's his wife, there's no guarantee he won't draw his sword. This man killed the former emperor's own father with his own hands. They say he tortures those who annoy him personally. He's a dangerous man, Lars said. He really is that kind of man. It was clear from his methods of warfare. He doesn't even treat his subordinates humanely, Lars continued. Besides, he has 6 concubines while she was saying all this. Her brother Eric didn't like it. It didn't go according to his plan. Lars noticed it, and it got even more interesting than the rumor that concubines are trying to kill each other. But as it turns out, it's also true. She can already see where they will direct their jealousy after the Empress appears. Lars walked over to Nicole, hugged her, and said that Nicole would have to endure being treated like that in a foreign land. And all by herself. Lars hugged her and told her that as an older sister, she couldn't accept it. In fact, Nicole was ready to run away at any chance, Lars thought. But no one believed her words. The Emperor never even came to meet her. Why she was covered in paint and really wants to go home. Less than a month later, letters started coming from her every day. She even admitted to spending the first night alone. Even though it's a shame. It was too much for such a little girl from the start. But she'll do better now, because that was in a previous life. And in this one, she'll make it right. Lar put it this way. She's going to the Sherry Old Empire instead of Nicole. Also, Lars added that they were in no position to ignore the Empire's wishes. The parents, of course, were confused. Lars went on to say that yes, and there would certainly be a better partner for Nicole. Smiling, Lars said, for the sake of her beloved sister, she was willing to be a substitute. Nicole was chosen to be the Emperor's wife. Not because she's right for the role. They just didn't want her, their daughter, to become empress of a huge country. That's the truth of the matter. They were more concerned about Nicole's safety first, though. Lars thought she was willing to give up her life for Nicole, but not until she saw that mocking smile. Father thought for a long time and finally gave his answer. "All right," he said. "A necessary evil is such because it is necessary," were his words. Although it pains him immensely to send her to such a place, he respects her decision and is willing to accept it, the father said. Lars replied, "Thank you," and smiled. Everything was going according to her plan, just as she had planned. Her father's last words were, "A necessary evil is such because it is necessary." "Lars, you're going to make a wonderful empress," her sister Nicole said, clapping her hands and smiling too. The girl was relieved that she wouldn't be the one with that hated tyrant. Lars, of course, couldn't say anything either. She knew what a nasty girl Nicole was, but she smiled too, so as not to betray it. Eric stood up and said, "Since that is my father's decision, he has nothing to add." Her mother and father said that Lars is the pride of their family, and they already miss her even though she is still with them. But Lars is everything. And what took away their traitorous smiles, their expressionless faces, and all the deceit they're carrying now? Everything Lars had on her mind was for her family. "I'm sorry, but this time it's them that'll be thrown away, not her, like in the last life." May, the 654th year of the continental calendar, the Sherry Old Empire. The wedding day of Emperor Zephin and Princess Lars. The wedding hall, with the bride and groom walking on a beautiful carpet. She'll start all over again. In sickness and in health, in riches and in poverty, the priest pronounces. But only Lars has the wrong words in her head, but other words of neglect, of indifference, of loneliness. What is it? Compared to the last 10 years, it's nothing. The priest says, "Do you vow to love and honor each other and to commit yourselves to your spouse?" She herself will personally conquer the Beria, thought Lars, but to the priest she replied, "Swears! She'll do things differently with this man. She'll do things differently." The Sherry Old Empire. A large country with a cold climate, it has prospered by absorbing other countries since ancient times. Every country transmits a certain kind of magic through blood. The people in her homeland, the kingdom of Beria, have fire magic, and in the Sherry Old Empire, healing magic. Moreover, in all countries, members of the ruling family are the most talented magic wielders. In her Berea homeland, it's pure-blood father and Eric. Nicole, who inherited her mother's blood, also has extremely powerful powers compared to the common people. And she, Lars, who has extraordinary magical abilities, even by her family's standards. Surely that's one reason why she's considered an heir to her uncle's bloodline. My mother, who had no suitors for a long time, was betrothed to the uncle of the second prince, who had the strongest magic, but she ended up marrying the father of the first prince, who became king. And finally, the emperor of the Sherry Old Empire is Zephon Barb Verbena. The emperor had 10 concubines, therefore he had many children, but among them, he was the one born with the strongest magical abilities. Zephon became emperor less than a year after being proclaimed heir to the throne. It is said that to gain his current position, he took advantage of the opportunity and chaos of war, and killed the former emperor. When he became emperor, he expanded the country's territory even more, and also took 6 concubines. They are all concubines of the emperor, live in the same palace, and have great power. This fact wouldn't hurt even after the emperor has an empress. Lars thought that she had no life experience, and would not be able to survive in this environment. Emperor Zephon immediately said that he had no intention of helping her. Hopefully she could turn a blind eye to the foolishness and jealousy of his concubines. The ceremony was over. The emperor turned around and said she had nothing more to say to him and left. The only person she can confidently say is on her side is Shin, her assistant who came with her from her palace. Actually, it would have been more sensible to bring a maid, but only one attendant could be brought along. He wasn't the man who had saved her in the past, but he wasn't an enemy either. During her confinement, he told her everything that had happened in 10 years, and in gratitude, she took him with her in this life. It would not be quite right to say that she trusted him, but still he had to be taken from the Berea. Decided to ask him, Shin, did he happen to mind coming here with her? Turns out she had forgotten to ask his opinion. The guy replied, no, that was an order from you. In the past, she hadn't given it much thought. But the more she interacted with him, the more it seemed to her as if he wasn't human. Shin Fenivores. He was a servant in the palace, worked excellently, but was very unsociable. It was said that he does his job unquestioningly, but cannot enjoy relationships with other servants. He became her servant when her people began to hate her, and when she was in the dungeon in her past life, he brought her food when no one else would. When Shin finished brushing Lars' hair, he put the comb down and said he was done. She thought that it was probably because Shin was such a person that he treated her without any prejudice. By the way, Lars thought, not one of the maids has come into the room. Usually the Empress has at least 1 or 2 maids in the room, waiting for orders, and no one has come in to clean yet. Even if you call, they won't pay attention, clearly showing disdain. Lars remembers that Nicole in the past, or rather in a past life, wrote about it in letters. Generally, if you compare this life to life in a tent on a battlefield, or life in a dungeon, it is living in good conditions. However, she can't stand back and just watch what's going on anymore. She refuses to live a life where all you have to do is endure. Her room, Lars went out to the maids and asked if someone would bring her a glass of water. Assistant Shin immediately said, I'll get it right away, walking out the classroom. But she was the only one who stopped him. Going out into the hallway where the maids walk, she watched and waited for her glass of water, but no one was distracted. Then she grabbed the first maid she saw and asked if she could hear her. Then she let her go, and the maid fell down. Lars called down fire with magic power in her hand. Then she said again, Answer me. Why is everyone ignoring her? Whose order is this? And if she didn't answer right now, she would burn her to the ground, pointing her hand with the fire directly toward the maid. Well, Lars thought, if it wasn't one of the concubines, then that meant the Emperor himself could have ordered such a thing. The maid, frightened of course, started to reply. That she was apologizing because of the head maid's order, she had no choice. A senior maid, Lars thought. The girl wondered why not the concubine and the Emperor himself. To the maids she said, Okay now, bring her water. She memorized her face. The girl jumped up and ran to get the water. She returned with a tray containing a pitcher of water and a glass. She came up to Lars and said, I brought you some water. Lars took a glass, poured water and poured it all over the maid. And then she said, the maid didn't answer her, so she threw the water on her. It was, wasn't it? Asked Lars. And the maid replied, Yes, thank you. Then Lars said the maid could go and waved her off. The maid said, Forgive her, and left. Lars hesitated for a moment. That's enough times. She had received such an order. If she were the same, she would have been hurt even over such a small thing. But, compared to what she had to go through, it's all small stuff. So a head maid, Lars thought. In a short period of time, the girl gathered information from all the maids. There was this kind of information. Each of the maids said that the head maid had a bad opinion of you, Your Majesty. Another maid said that she took a bribe from the 4th concubine. The 3rd said that she was also in awe of the 6th concubine. And the 4th one ordered that they should not obey your orders, Your Majesty. All the maids confirmed that the order had been given to the head maid. She's not that important, Lars thought. Lars thought of an interesting plan. Waving her hand, she said, Shin, bring the head maid over here. Shin bowed and said, Will do. Shin held out a tray with a glass of water, and Lars thought, right, we need to prepare well first. When Shin found the head maid, he said that she should go to the Empress. Lars, the head maid, thought, She's so busy. Why did she call her? As they walked down the corridor, the head maid thought after looking at Shin. Besides, this man didn't ask for her opinion. Knocking on the door of the room, Lars said, I beg your pardon, may I come in? The maid was outraged at the way he was acting. Lars said, Come in, and only then did they enter the room. Everything in the room was scattered. All the curtains were cut. The furniture, the bedding, various objects were scattered. Lars was sitting in the chair, and she turned to the older maid with the words, We have a lot to talk about, don't we? Lars remembered, just for a moment, before the older maid came, and when she made a mess in the room, her past, or rather a past life from her childhood. There was a shout from the room. I don't want to! Nicole likes bunnies! Wailed the little girl. Ah, excuse me, Mistress Nicole. The maid leaned toward her. The whole picture was seen by Lars. The maid said she would bring Nicole a bunny toy right away. The maid said she would bring Nicole a bunny toy right away. As Lars walked further down the hallway, she saw Brother Eric's room, who scattered all the papers on the floor and told his servant to gather everything up. The servant, when he was collecting, said, "However, these are important documents concerning the southern ports." When Eric says to take them to his older sister and he leaves on business. Walking past the room, Lars became upset. Upset by the rumors that the children were ungrateful. Her brother and sister broke everything, threw everything away, and the servants had to do it all. And Lars had to do it all. Fix the bear and come to his sister's house to play with her. Lars decided to clean up after her brother with the paperwork and get it all calculated and in order. She was an obedient child, perfect in everything. Always helping everyone, pleasing everyone, and doing everything. And now we come back to the present. And now this obedient child has decided to get a little messy and make, finally in his whole life, a mess. It turns out that being broken is always so exciting, and making a mess is a lot of fun, Lars thought as she made that mess for the head maid. When the head maid entered the room, she said, "What's going on here?" Seeing this mere mess of clutter. Sitting back in her chair, Lars calmly replied with a smile that she too would like to understand what the matter was. "Why, no one comes to do the cleaning, no one at all. Give the order to the maids, those are your duties after all," the older maid asked Lars. The girl continued. "Why is no one paying attention to her, making an innocent face?" She said, "Imagine how lonely she was these days." The older maid asked, "Ooh, why is it that you tell her everything? How? Why? Aren't you in charge of all the maids?" The older maid shouted, "She has no idea what you're talking about. They were all acting out of personal motives." But the maid thought quite differently over this trifle. She decided to trash the room, and that on the very first day. "What will happen next?" thought the maid. Crazy wench. And how it felt to know her power, the maid said confidently. "By order of His Majesty Emperor Zephan, she has all the maids under her command. Her wish is tantamount to that of the emperor. You should be grateful for getting such a room," the maid said. "The maid hopes you will not harbor false hopes." The last words of her father, Larsa. "After all, you are just a fancy decoration, an empress for formalities, nothing more." These words were spoken by the maid. "Emperor Zephan already has plenty of worthy wives. Maybe the fact that the maids don't come to you is an expression of their attitude towards you. They don't want to follow the pathetic orders of the Bat Princess. A princess of a country like Berea, which has nothing to boast of but its magic. The head maid said it hasn't even been a day yet, and you haven't even made an effort to understand the maid's predicament. You may be a mere decoration, but she already represents your sad future," the older maid said. Then she coughed and said, "I mean, we always do our work diligently and thoroughly." The maid doesn't dismiss the thought that perhaps one day the day will come when she too will recognize her as empress. But it will not be today. Perhaps then the servants' attitudes toward her would change. "First of all, sort out your room yourself," the maid said. "If you can't handle such a minor problem, how are you even going to protect your place? As someone who is willing to obey His Majesty the Emperor anywhere and any time, she will take orders from a wench with playboy blood in her veins." The maid turned around and headed for the door. But no such luck. Before she could open the door, the heel of Lars's foot was in her face. "So then," said Lars, "it never came to your attention that she is the wife of His Majesty the Emperor." Lars went on to say that she didn't remember being interested in her opinion, even though technically she is the Empress. Patting the maid's face, she said, "So why does she have to put up with this attitude from everyone?" The words, but then the stroking turned into Lars grabbing her by the neck. Lars asked, "Why? What's the reason for all this? Why aren't you answering?" "Okay, you left her no other choice," Lars said. "You said your wish was the Emperor's wish, right? Okay, let's see how true that is." Shoving the maid aside, Lars said. She added, "Let's see. Devote time to jewelry, which doesn't interest him at all, or to the precious head maid who hurt herself. What's the last thing the Emperor would want to do? Lars would be happy with any option if she could meet the man she loved that way." "This is going to be fascinating," the girl said, grabbing the maid by the hair. "Weren't you prepared for this turn of events when you pulled all those things? Let's check it out right now." Lars grabbed her hair and reached over to Sheen to grab the scissors. The maid shouted, "What are you going to do?" seeing the scissors in front of her. Lars replied, since today is the first day, she will limit herself to hair, and proceeded to start cutting off the head maid's hair. The maid started yelling, "Stop it, please, for starters, calm down!" The maid yelled that she would take back everything she had previously said and tried to shove Lars away. But the girl told her that if she twitched like that, not only would her hair suffer, but her eyes might get hurt. Cutting off some of her hair, she said, "Let's see how it suits you better." The maid twitched. "Well, Lars, and I warned her not to twitch, or you might hurt yourself." And so it was. There was a scratch near the eye because of the scissors, because the maid had twitched. Said to her, "She told you to sit still, but you wouldn't listen and you were twitching. As you said, such a trifle is the cause of so much clamor. See, I told you it was nothing. The emperor is a ruthless man. He is a man who will kill his subject in cold blood, and he will not act through senior servants." Therefore, Lars said, "Don't worry. Your wishes are equal to the emperor's wishes. Remember this. These are your words. Besides, he could with his magic heal such a minor wound." The maid kept yelling that she was apologizing and it was her fault. The maid shouted that she would have the maids clean your room immediately. "Ha!" Lars said. "What on earth are you talking nonsense about? Address the maid. This room will be completely cleaned." You swung the scissors at her. The next day, Lars's room was simply gleaming, perfectly scrubbed, clean, smelling fresh and scented with roses. After this incident, there were many rumors, and the servants and concubines were all discussing what had happened yesterday. They say that Her Majesty the Empress splashed water in the face of a maid. Moreover, Madame Senior Maid had her hair cut very short. The maids were discussing among themselves that they couldn't imagine that such a thing could happen in just one day. This is the same Bat Princess who has a bad reputation. Looking at her, the maid said as the girl sat and drank tea. Everyone was whispering, "Princess Bat, don't you know that's the nickname of Her Majesty the Empress?" In her homeland of Berea, she is known as the villain who deposed Prince Eric and the heir to the throne. She also raised taxes all the time and gathered the aristocrats at a party every day. She rewrote the entire law, threatening the king several times, even purposely planned her country's trade routes so that the allies would attack the ships. A particular trait of members of the Berea royal family is golden hair. However, only Princess Lars has it, not dark hair. They say she was popularly nicknamed Princess Bat because of her immoral behavior, and because she is the only one in her lineage to have dark hair. Rumor has it that she's not even related by blood to King Berea. Maybe she's the queen's illegitimate daughter. Out loud about the maid reached the emperor, and they came to report to him, and the maid. He asked, "What do you say? Does he need to do something for some maid?" Besides, the emperor said her hair would grow back soon. It was only a matter of time. When Lars returned to her room, her servant Shin came in with a letter. She asked him to read it out. His boyfriend began to read. The letter went on to say that holding tea parties with society ladies was also part of the Empress's public duties. The society ladies. Is it possible that one of the concubines would participate? She wondered. And there's also a dinner planned for tonight with the emperor. According to the letters Nicole sent in her past life to Charol, she was treated poorly. Perhaps no one will take kindly to Lars this time either. Lars decided to ask his assistant, "What does he think, to go or not?" The servant replied, "Do as you see fit, mistress." She had been treated roughly by concubines in the past, too, Lars remembered. Who had sent her the invitation? The girl took the envelope in her hands to read it. This is the fourth concubine, Eliza Annette. Lars began to remember that she remembered her, how she came to her and got to know her. "Nice to meet you, Princess Take. She is the fourth concubine, Eliza Annette." Of course, that was before her eyesight was taken away. Afterward, all the concubines came, and one of them said, "And this is the same Princess Bat of whom you spoke." Eliza mockingly said the girl. What a pathetic sight. Which one of you princesses said to the girl they complimented her only in that she is very fit for this place to the dungeon, and the nickname to her also fits it like this place. The concubines could not believe instead of being grateful, it was the savage Bat who refused the honorable lord's offer. Although if she says show some mercy to that filthy Berean wench for once, she'll let you have a glass of water. "Come on, Princess Bat, she has no pride at all, and it will be easy for her to say it," shouted one of the concubines. Even after she lost her sight, she and the whole crowd looked at her like cattle and grinned at her. "Well," Lars replied to her assistant Tyre, "can you send them a reply that she'll participate?" And had the servants prepare her dress. She asked that Shin remember to write that at the slightest mistake, she would be held responsible. Shin bowed and went to fulfill his empress's orders. It was time for a tea party. A sumptuous table was set up, with a lot of different cakes, pastries, and sweets on it. Cups for all the ladies were already set out, until Lars came in and the girls were sitting around having a conversation. One of them said, "Even imagined, she couldn't imagine putting that headmaid in her place." This was said by the girl in the blue dress. The second of the concubines replied that she was said to have quite a complex character. This girl was wearing a green dress. Of course, her nickname is Princess Bat. What a shame. All the girls laughed. One of the concubines said that compared to her, their mistress Eliza was completely, even when she's sitting down, there's such a nobility emanating from her. It's about the concubine Elise. The other concubines praised Eliza, saying that their new emperor could only be matched by a girl like Eliza. Then the girls' conversation moved on to Lars. It seems that she is unleashing her hands on the maids who occupy a low position. But if she starts manhandling noble ladies and there is no forgiveness, even if she is an empress, then a terrible punishment awaits this bat, said one of the concubines. Lars came into the room with the words, "She can see you're already gathered here." Lars was wearing a gorgeous burgundy dress. Her hair was well groomed, and she smelled very good with expensive perfume. All the girls turned to her, looked at her, but no one smiled. Everyone was sizing her up with their gaze, and only one of them, it was Eliza who had invited her, clapped her hands and said, "They've been waiting for you, Your Highness." She held out her hand to the empty spot where there was a chair for the girl to sit down, and invited her to the table. Eliza also said, "I hope you enjoy the food that was on the table." But Lars was not at all interested in the food. She immediately looked at Elise and remembered her as she stood in front of the dungeon. That was her. And the same words, "I hope she likes the food." Then in the dungeon, she knocked the plate of food to the floor and stepped on the food. And then she threw that food at her in the dungeon with her foot and said, "Eat, please." Lars remembered that she had been then in her past life one single girl, a good girl, but she couldn't see her here now. She had bandaged her eyes then. And Eliza asked, "How do you like life in the palace? Are you used to life in Sheriold?" Lars replied, "Yes." Elise then said that they were just all worried about her. The Bat Princess of Beria has become an empress. Naturally, this is a very onerous position. They say you only brought one man as a servant, and there's also a rumor that you took your younger sister instead of the empress. Every time Eliza spoke, then all the girls around, the rest of the concubines, laughed. They heard about the headmaid. "Did you want to play empress so badly?" Elise asked. Lars sat quietly, drinking tea. She had only memories from the past before her eyes. Just like then and now, all those concubines were laughing with her. Let's clarify, all 5 concubines. The 6th one wasn't there. By the way, something else happened. They say the chef showed all his skill and prepared a special dish for you, said Eliza. Well, after that incident, she became blind, so she doesn't know who exactly did bad things to her. One of the girl's concubines said, "By the way, they say that this dark hair of yours is not peculiar to the royal family. Could it be that you are an illegitimate child?" That girl asked. Lars gave a surprised look, but heard back that it was such a rumor. Eliza immediately decided to change the tense and said it sounded rude, and the concubine who asked about the hair apologized and said it was just a rumor. Eliza said she was really worried about you, Empress. His Majesty the Emperor has beautiful silver hair. What shame do you feel standing next to him with such messy hair? Eliza said and laughed. All the other girls also picked up on this bad and silly joke and started laughing too. Lars sat silent and thought. Anything really in this place? Nicole, who was raised with love, wouldn't last a day. Although Lars doesn't care about these words in any way at all. On the contrary, she can't miss the chance to play the word game. You're right, put in the cup, said Lars. If she was an illegitimate child, she'd be in for a rough ride. And by the way, added Lars, if Mistress Eliza becomes pregnant by His Majesty, that child will be considered illegitimate. And she smiled too. And she also continued, a wretched child will be a disgrace to the family, a child by a concubine, thus putting Eliza on the spot. And Eliza's mood immediately soured, and all her smile disappeared. Lars went on to say that baseless rumors would constantly swirl around that he was the child of a concubine, alien to nobility, with only half royal blood flowing in his veins, from which he disliked his own father. Lars didn't stop, but continued to speak further. She's also concerned that you don't have silver hair. If the child inherits your hair color or eye color from you, everyone will doubt its kinship with the emperor, and it was not certain that His Majesty would recognize a concubine's child. And then Eliza couldn't stand it any longer and pounded her fists on the table. She shouted, "Shut your fucking mouth, she's drooling out of her mouth." But only Lars sat there and acted calmly, smiling. After all, when she was insulted, she didn't freak out. "Well," she said, "please forgive her." She got up from the table. "It was an entertaining tea party. She hopes you'll invite her again." "Well, she must go, for she is dining with His Majesty tonight, and she must prepare for the evening. She also can't wait to find out what color their baby's hair will be." When Lars left, Elise nearly broke the table in anger. When everyone had dispersed, Eliza was still freaking out for a long time. She said indignantly that it was the Princess Bat. "What is her and His Majesty's child's business?" she said. At having spent her first wedding night alone, Eliza said she thinks she doesn't know? What else did she say? Dinner? Yes, there were so many dinners between Elise and the emperors. Of course, they haven't been together as much lately. She can't believe that such a wench has become empress. She will definitely get her banished from the palace. So she walked down the hallway and freaked out. Eliza was followed by all the other concubines except one. "There is no way His Majesty has feelings for her," Eliza resented. When she came to the dining room, she saw that the servants were already preparing for the evening meal, and the girl said, "Wait a minute, supper with His Majesty." So she was already up to something. In that case, she should help with the decorating, and Eliza went all ready to do something to somehow interfere with this dinner. In Lars's room, the girl stands by the mirror and looks at her dress. It seems to be all right and fits her well. Also in the room is the maid, the most important one, who is now with a short haircut. She looked at Lars too, and thought that indeed the dress suits her very well, and she looks good. Lars said Tyre would be doing hair, so the head maid could go. Since the day she had taken up residence in this palace, she and the emperor had never seen each other, and since they are now married, it is their responsibility to eat together regularly. He needed this marriage to take someone from Beria hostage. In order to prevent that, she needs to prove her worth. She has plenty of information to offer him, and dinner is an invaluable opportunity to do so. While Lars was getting ready in his room, there was a knock on the door, and a maid entered, bringing a message from His Majesty the Emperor. He informs you that he is waiting for you in the garden. Lars took the envelope in her hands and thought, "A message? It means she's gonna see him soon. He has no reason to write. It's obviously a ruse to her." Lars guessed it right away, but whatever. Besides, she's got plenty of time and she wants to have fun. To give her a little time, too. Good luck hurting her even a little, Lars thought. After going down to the garden with her servant Shin, she found no one. Looking around a bit, it didn't look like anyone was hiding, or they would have shown up by now, Lars thought. Unless, of course, his goal is to make her labor as long as possible. There was a noise, a rumble from above. Lars looked up and saw something flying at her. She didn't react in time, and something white spilled out onto her. Upstairs, from where it was thrown from, stood Eliza with the words, "Oh, it's our landmark, Her Majesty the Empress. What happened?" "So what's your view?" Eliza asked. Several other concubines stood next to Lisa. And down in the street, there was Lars, and she was wearing something white, and there was a bucket with this white, incomprehensible substance lying next to her. Eliza said, "What a pity. I remember you said you had already found with the Emperor. Too bad. Your new dress is ruined. Although on the one hand," Eliza added, "your hair looks much better now than your usual dull dark hair. Oh, and that color suits you." At this moment, Emperor Zephin was watching. But he had not reacted yet, because he had said he would not help her. Then Lars turned to her servant and said, "Shin, prepare me another dress." The fellow bowed and said, "Will do. Also, prepare a bath. I need to rinse this dirt out of my hair." Set the evening. The emperor was already seated at a large table set with various dishes, and Lars was waiting. He glanced at the time because the girl was late, and already quite late. The servants standing nearby were talking among themselves. What can Her Majesty not yet be ready for? The emperor thought she was upset over some trifle. He imagined everyone calling her Princess Bat in Berea, but she ended up being a wuss. She's probably locked in her room right now crying, and all the other concubines just make fun of her. The emperor said he would go to his room to his servant. The lad replied that he would prepare everything immediately. But just as he wanted to leave, he heard a voice. "Sorry I'm late," Lars said. "She apologizes for keeping you waiting, Your Highness." Preparing for dinner took a little longer. When the girl entered the room, the Emperor had a very surprised face, because she didn't have black hair, but white hair, and looked very gorgeous. "Well, before we tell you about dinner, Lars and the Emperor are going to bury some memories with you." Nicole's memories. Nicole's room. Nicole screams that she doesn't want to be Empress anymore. She wants to go home, but the maid tries to calm her down and tells her not to worry. Just like all that dirt had been poured on Nicole, just like it was being poured on Lars now, and Nicole was screaming. "How do you think she should calm down now? Look at her! How can she go to dinner like that now?" "She's the Empress after all. Why doesn't anyone want to obey her?" Nicole asked herself. Why should she endure this injustice? The maid said she would have a new dress ready for her right away. But Nicole screamed, "No, she won't! You better get busy getting ready to go back to Berea!" But the maid said that was impossible. Something went wrong. Shouldn't her older sister be handling all this? A letter. A letter. She would write a letter now and tell her father everything. When he finds out how Nicole is being treated here, their whole nation will rise up against them. Just like that, she was late for dinner with the Emperor. The Emperor looked at his watch. Without waiting for Nicole, the Emperor proceeded to eat, and the girl never came. But this time was different. Lars had time to get cleaned up and come to dinner. Lars stands by the table, waiting for an invitation from His Majesty. But he glared at the girl so hard that all the servants couldn't understand what was going on. Everyone thought, doesn't he recognize the Bat Princess? Yes, she looks different now. Her hair isn't black now, it's blonde. Lars asked, "Son, do you see it too? The fact that no one recognizes her." After all, before doing such a thing, Lars remembered reading the correspondence, and in a past life from Nicole, Eliza had done the same thing to Nicole as from Lars. At last Lars was offered a seat, and the girl said, "Glad I made it before the meal was served." Shin helped her sit down. Turns out Lars hadn't recolored anything. When the girl took a bath, all that hair was washed away. So the dye washed off her paint, washed off her hair and all over her body, and there was no need to dye them dark anymore. She stayed with her hair color blonde, and how it was originally as a child, her parents asked her to do it. Her father said, "Lars, it suits her very well with such beautiful black hair. Yes, it will become known that she has golden hair. She will definitely be tried to be attacked by people who want to take away her magic power. Oh, the worry for her precious daughter. She's afraid something terrible will happen to her," Mother said. "Sister, you look much better with dark hair," Nicole was saying. Lars, she would need to dye her hair black regularly so no one would guess her magical powers. She remembered her brother's words, saying that she had been a pawn from the beginning with her nasty dark hair. Proof of that. Even after arriving at the palace, she had dyed herself a dark color to avoid unnecessary fuss. On the one hand, it was even more comfortable. In her homeland of Berea, golden hair color is a symbol of the royal family. In general, golden and silver hair is an indicator of great magical power, a common trait spread across all continents. Her family encouraged her to dye her hair to ruin her reputation. With just her golden hair, she's already showing what she's worth. Lars noticed that the Emperor was very much surprised. She asked, "Do you have something to say?" But only the Emperor pretended that he didn't want to say anything. He took a glass of wine and drank simply. When he had finished, he asked for more. The servant said yes, he would be right with him. The servant, while pouring him wine, thought that the Emperor had not yet eaten, but had already emptied his glass. As Lars looked at the Emperor, she remembered, incidentally told by the man who had healed her eyes, that it was him. After drinking another glass of wine, the Emperor said, "Did you dye your hair?" But Lars replied, "No, it's her natural hair color." "Her hair?" the Emperor said, but Lars interrupted and replied, "She was forced to hide her hair color by family rules." "Family rules? What does that mean?" the Emperor asked. "Surely they must have been created for the benefit of her younger brother and sister," replied Lars. Lars explained that her younger sister hadn't fully inherited their family's magical power, and she didn't exactly have golden hair. The Emperor said, "But it seems there was also a prince." "You mean Eric?" Lars asked. "But Eric has the same golden hair as her, yet his magic ability is quite weak." "Weak? Sounds as if, compared to your strength, his strength is worthless at all. Eric is the heir to the throne, after all. And if the heir to the throne has less magical power than the princess, he will look weak in people's eyes. Maybe that was the reason. The emperor said he still didn't understand. Usually an inferior candidate will be weeded out naturally. Lars thought she wasn't sure. Past lives had screened her out even though she was the strongest. Raising her head, Lars said, "And your majesty, you take an interest in her family. It is such an honor for them." And she added, "She's excited about the fact that they're having dinner together like a normal family. Plus, her real hair color matches your beautiful silver hair better." The emperor told her not to be deluded. He never demanded her dignity or qualities that an empress should have. There are plenty of women of value in this palace. But Lars said she doubted that. She feels like she has more value than any of his women. The emperor became angry, saying, "What haughty words." The servants standing near them tensed up very much. "What's her value now?" he says. "Only established kinship with her Barry, but he doesn't remember recognizing her as empress." He had seen so many women like her before today. The emperor said he advised her to remember once and for all. The moment she left this palace, she would be finished. Lars wasn't scared at all. Smiling, she said, "If you kill her, you'll never get information about a situation that will soon put the whole country on its ear." Raising her glass and winking at him, she said, "Of course it would be a great loss." The emperor asked, "What is she talking about? Answer me quickly." Lara said, "White Meridian," surprised because they heard a familiar name. The White Meridian is the national merchant ship of the Chariol Empire. It departs from its home port, bypasses the ports of colonial and trading partner countries, and returns back to the empire. For the Chariot Empire, which is located in a cold climate zone, trade is an indispensable way to extract resources. The Meridian, loaded with goods, is due to return home next month. Also, in about a month, an allied country of her homeland, the Kingdom of Capricorn, plan to attack this White Meridian. Their goal is to seize the goods. Should they succeed, the entire crew of the ship would be killed, and the Chariol Empire would lose all goods. Beria supports his ally in every way possible in this attack. Because of the cover-up of this incident, Capricorn promised his ally Beria a huge reward. Lars remembers how it was in a previous life. Then she came up and asked her father if she was sure everything was going to be all right, for our Nicole in Chariol is the empress. "There is no reason to worry," father replied. "The Kingdom of Capricorn has not been their ally since time immemorial. We need to help each other." When Lara asked, "But they have friendly relations with the Chariot Empire, don't they?" "It's just an act," her brother said. "And besides, wasn't she the one who suggested this plan in the first place?" She had never imagined that he would be used for such purposes. "She's just for the sake of trade. Beria hasn't changed a thing," father replied. "Lars, thanks to her, both our Beria and the Capricorn Kingdom are left to benefit." He assured his father that they wouldn't find out anything in Chariot. He's very grateful to Lars. He is always proud of her, his favorite daughter. Of course, the Capricorn Kingdom was doing the wrong thing ethically. However, it was necessary to maintain the prestige of each country, father said. Her father had always warned her to think twice if this case became known in the Chariot Empire. Emperor Zephon would not leave them alone, even if they denied involvement. Just because they are friends with the Capricorn Kingdom, Nicole, who is the empress, will suffer. Her father said that everything went perfectly thanks to her, and he would rely only on her from now on. She had been so stupid when she was in that life. Lars will do things completely differently now, the girl thought. In the end, the Chariot Empire couldn't find the culprit. The Kingdom of Castle, where White Meridian had last stayed, had to answer for it, and it also had to pay a huge amount of compensation for the invasion and White Meridian. The story spread that in the end, Emperor Zephon managed to compensate for all the damage suffered by his country. However, he had to spend a lot of time and effort searching for the culprit, and all the credit for covering up the crime went to her father and Eric. But that was exactly what she wanted back then. And so, back to reality. Emperor Zephon asked what she had to say about White Meridian. "He's coming back next month. Does she want to speak out regarding trade?" the emperor asked her. She received information that White Meridian would be attacked in a month's time, and she's aware of the exact date and time of the attack, even knows the location. In addition, she possesses enough information that will be beneficial to the Chariot Empire and to you, Your Majesty. "Well, what do you think?" asked the girl. "Don't you want to test the value of her and this information once? If she's useful this time, she'll prove her worth to him." The information she had learned about Yaz, Princess Beria, the information about the years Shin had told her about, all of it would become her wealth and weapons. The Emperor asked more. What information, besides the White Meridian, does she have knowledge of? Lars said she would tell him about everything when the time was right. She can't possibly reveal all her cards at once. She fully understands the value of information, Lars said. Can't reveal all your cards, you say? Said the Emperor. Not bad, he thought. He agrees to check for all criteria of accuracy. Allow time and other data on the attack, waving to his servant. If White Meridian is actually attacked and they manage to thwart the attack, then he will recognize her value, the Emperor said. White Meridian is the backbone of their country's resources. In particular, this time the ship was loaded with goods of high material value. He can't allow it to be looted. If the criminals show up, every last one of them will drown in the sea, the Emperor said. Also, if she leads them astray, then the person who drowns will be her. That same night in Eliza's room, the girl freaks out and breaks a cup and a glass while yelling what she says. Appearing before His Majesty with golden hair and bargaining with him, Eliza shouted, "What was she haggling about in there?" yelled Eliza at her maid. The maid stuttered and said she didn't know about that. Sorry. So her dark hair was fake. Elise freaked out. So those conversations she'd had about hair color. She would definitely regret mocking Eliza then, the girl shouted. The next day, Lars sits in his room in an armchair reading a book, remembering last night's dinner with the Emperor. The Emperor's words, "Dinner has come to an end," are interesting. "Next time will be in a month," said the Emperor. Lars thought she should think things over carefully until then. A maid knocked at the door. She said she apologized and there was a message for you, Your Majesty. And there was a letter of some kind lying there. It was torn into little pieces.